Welcome back to the second episode of Challenge Accepted, The Wheel of Time. In this series, we are continuing a consistent rewrite that tells a story that leads into itself, one episode after another. And so, if you haven't seen that, you're about to be really confused. On the other hand, you don't have to have read the books or the TV show. Just know that there are going to be spoilers, as I describe things that happen both in the book and in the TV show and give context to both at times. Welcome to the workshop. Today, we have some content that is different from our usual content. The reason we had to add these videos to our roster was simple. I have been a huge fan of The Wheel of Time since I was little when my mom would read them like bedtime stories, albeit somewhat censored, which is why when I found out that there were so many fans involved, and with many promises thrown in the mix, I was excited about the making of the Amazon Prime series. I had a lot of hope for it. Sure, before the show's release, there were some comments that gave me pause, but way more assurances. If you want a better breakdown of what I'm referring to, then take a look at the video description down below. I have since started watching the series. I'm pretty disappointed. I was expecting many changes. That was not a surprise. But I was not expecting a fan to lose the characters entirely and thus obliterate the heart of the story. Are these bold words coming from someone who has only seen the first episode? Well, let me explain why. I decided in the first episode to try and put the promises of Rafe Judkins, the showrunner, to the test. Nothing happens in that show without his approval. According to many of the remarks before the show, these changes are mostly budget, with a bit of book-to-screen issues and some need to speed things along sprinkled in. Well, challenge accepted, as today I attempt a rewrite that will be done one episode at a time in an attempt to match the pace of the show. As an added benefit, it should reveal that my rewrite won't work in the timeline and budget constraints of the show, or at least it will if I am wrong. As much as I doubt it, it might also reveal that I misjudged the show. As another note, the format of these videos might change over time, as I rushed this video out in an attempt to not fall further behind. Also, I wasn't able to devote as much time as I would like, also prepping and shooting our other content. This means that the edits could be pretty bad, since that is the part that I will be saving time by avoiding doing it. Last thing on this disclaimer, I have read the entire book series. So, if you haven't read the books, there's going to be heavy spoilers. Obviously, if you haven't watched the episode I'm covering, then there's likely to be spoilers for that too. Okay, so as I stated in the intro, this is a challenge. I only watch one episode at a time and take my videos to the same endgame of the episode. This goal assumes that the show doesn't devolve so much that it is no longer recognizable, or so poorly done that its plot points are not worth reaching. Also, I haven't watched any reviews, video essays, or anything post-series release about the subject, since that would be cheating. I will avoid anything that would raise the budget to the best of my knowledge, and will be matching the pace of the show. Anytime I can reduce the budgetary load on the show, I will attempt to do so. I will also be asking your opinion on each rewrite, but take it easy on me. Remember that unlike the people who wrote the show, I didn't have 2 years, a full team, formal training, and I am working within the constraints that they didn't have to, namely, conforming to a TV show as it airs, episode by episode. I will do my best, though. I have only 1 week to prepare each episode, and I have other responsibilities each week, so I can't devote my full attention to the series. All said and done, game, set, match. Okay, I am making a few minor changes to the show, and to update you on what's happening with that, I will be starting a $ counter. Now, we're going to subtract a $ every time we make a significant savings in the budget, and we're going to add a $sign anytime we make a scene that would have been more expensive than the scene we saw in the show. That way we can kind of keep track of our budget. Obviously, these aren't refined, perfectly accurate numbers. I quite frankly do not have the time or the resources to research the exact budget of what the show cost and what my version of it would cost, especially because I haven't been able to write up a script or give specifics on scenes. But in general, we're going to be looking at things that save us big money, like avoiding VFX shots, avoiding having too many actors on screen at once, avoiding stunts, all these things. We'll keep track of that in that way. The other thing is that whenever an episode needs corrections after the fact, those will be pinned to the top of the comments. And also, while we're on the subject, if there's anything you can see in the show that we've missed, please let us know in the comments. Maybe you've read the books and I've accidentally misremembered something from the books. And so if there's something you want to say, leave it in the comments and we'll try and answer it. And maybe we can expound a little bit. Without further delay, where we start and where we end. Episode 2. Beginning at the flight from the village, ending at the separation at Shadar Logoth. When you watch the recap of the episode, they basically showcased parts of the episode that either cost them lots of money or they thought they were really cool. The intro doesn't give you much context for what happened before. I think we just cut that out altogether. It was just there to pad the runtime in a way that doesn't cost them any money, which I get, but we're going to be saving money on this episode, and we're going to try and make sure that the shots we fill that time with aren't expensive. So we're not even going to count a $sign for that. We're going to cut that because it's kind of just wasting our time, and we already have limited time. So we should start off with the flight to Tarn Ferry. Included in this scene is a brief shot of Nynaeve tracking them. I should explain that in the books, we don't actually find out that Nynaeve's behind them until a big reveal. Kind of like it happened in the show, but not exactly. And we'll give context to that later. But I think it's important that we, rather than have a surprise, we instead reveal something about Nynaeve, because we have limited screen time to work with, and we want to make sure that we pack as much information as we can in there. And so showcasing Nynaeve and her tracking skills without saying a word is just going to be good visual storytelling. So we see a brief scene of her tracking them. We know she's behind them. Also, during this Tarn Ferry scene that they run to, someone forgot to add Thom. We won't say names here, but here's where we add Thom. Thom Merlin is waiting at the ferry because some idiot told him he could make it to the town at Tarn Ferry by nightfall. However, with the ferry being destroyed by Moraine, and him realizing that Moraine is Aes Sedai, and feeling the need to protect the boys, he is going to decide to go along with them. Moraine doesn't really want him to, but he kind of forces the issue. Maybe saying something along the lines of, well, I'm sorry, the ferry seems to be broken. Not sure how that could have happened. But in any case, I'll be traveling in the same direction as you, so I guess we're stuck this way. There's a ton of benefits to doing this way. We can skip all the White Cloak scenes altogether. They're not necessary, and I'll explain why later in the episode. There is something important here that I should bring up from later in this episode. Moraine tells some quote-unquote lies to the White Cloaks later, and the White Cloaks shouldn't be showcased at all in this episode. And so we're going to move those lies to the ferryman. I'll give some context on that in a second. We save a ton on budget by not showing the Trollocs on the other side. This is more accurate to the books. Also, we can add the Drakkar screeching over above to a lot of these chase scenes. Just by having that audio effect but not showing any visuals, not only do we preserve some mystery, but we save a ton on budget. Also, if we need to see the Trollocs are behind them to keep up to date on the fact that they're being followed, then we should see pillars of smoke or torches like we did in the first episode. Again, not only does it save money, but it's more accurate to the books because the Trollocs aren't right behind them. There's no need to kill the Taran ferryman. In fact, making him sympathetic was kind of weird, because in the books, if Lan hadn't been looking so tough, in fact, they tell them, like, everybody, make sure you look tough, make sure you look like you're ready for a fight, because the Taran ferryman would have killed them had he thought he could get their gold without dying or losing a few of his men. So he is a sketchy dude, not a sympathetic, tragic death. Also, despite the fact that he's a sketchy dude, Moraine still treats him with compassion, giving him his full wages on the other side, enough to replace the ferry that she destroyed. So, totally mischaracterized there. Also, making the whirlpool as cool as it was not needed. See, Moraine actually makes some cover of mist when they're pursuing them to confuse the Trollocs and the Drakkar. And so this idea that they had to make like a digital whirlpool and show like the Trollocs on the other side is not accurate. We cut both of those and we instead replace it with a thick mist. It didn't even have to be virtual effects. It could have just been practical and just been a thick fog. Of course, we would go with whatever's cheapest. The fog doesn't have to be beautifully rendered. It doesn't have to be translucent. This is a magic fog that blocks view of everything, and then they can hear the cracking of the ferry off screen. This is more accurate to the books. It conveys everything, and it saves us money. I know bombastic shots are cooler, and so there is something lost by not having the cool visual effects on screen and just covering it all up with mist. However, in this case, we're not just cutting on cool looking scenes for no reason. We actually need this money for later in this episode. This episode isn't going to save us a ton of money because we're going to have some savings in the beginning so that we can have the hero shot, the money shot, later in the episode. So, as I said, Nynaeve tracking them is kind of a big reveal, but showing her skills now saves us time later. That's one of the major benefits of shooting it in this way, which I kind of already mentioned. Now, I talk about a lot here. Let me try to sum up some context. Moraine uses the fog to confuse the Trollocs, so they're not even sure if she crossed the ferry. Also, the forces are not nearly enough to be looking across the river anyway, so again, we already talked that's a benefit in the savings, but it's also just more accurate to the book. And it's because they're not too close that this fog is able to make it unclear in which direction they went. Maybe they crossed here at Taran Ferry, or maybe they went up the river or down the river. They have to spread out and look. The other thing here is I know you haven't met Thom yet if you've only watched episode 2. But Thom is a gleeman. Basically a traveling one-man circus. Music, poetry, tumbling, magic tricks, I mean, you name it, they can do it. Especially Thom, who is a cut above most gleemen. You'll learn more about him through the episode, and then, of course, in the characterization portion of this episode where I just talked about the characters, that's when I'll be really talking about Thom, gleeman, and such. Okay, so we got a lot done with this one quick couple of scenes of them running showing up at the Tarn Ferry and having the Tarn Ferry scene. Of course, we spend a little bit more time on them meeting Thom, but we've already cut so much by cutting out the White Cloaks, and we're not done cutting scenes. Here we have the next scene. These are our travel scenes. There's plenty of these in the episode. We're just going to try and do them better. The boys talk by the fireside, giving us a better idea of their character. Now, I'll talk more about this in particular in the actual character wrap-up here. However, the one thing I can say is that we do really want to showcase who these kids are, because we haven't accurately portrayed them in the show yet, and it's very important for their character arcs to figure out who they are now and why they do things, because this is a very character-driven story, with characters really shaping the world, almost as much as the world shaping the characters. We can also use these campfire scenes to have Thom share poems, songs, stories, to naturally deliver exposition that is much needed by this point. Now, I really am not sure in this regard. Maybe poems or songs could be too expensive, but he could easily tell stories, which is a big part anyway. Also, introducing Thom this early gives us an extra actor to showcase, meaning that it could potentially cost more money. And so, during these fireside scenes, or these campfire scenes, having only a few characters on at a time, I think it would work. By having these scenes with only a few characters at a time, we do save money, but also the group has a lot of different dynamics. Because each character is so fleshed out and real and visceral, and they really, it feels like you could know them. That's how well the characters are made in the books. And each one of them have a different dynamic with another character. So by splitting them up and having small groups talk, we can explore certain dynamics between certain characters and help us to better understand the characters, but also save money in a natural way too. It doesn't have to feel like we're low budget. We can do this, be more accurate to the books, showcase, tell a better story, and save money all at the same time. In essence, allowing us to have our cake and eat it too. The benefits of the scene really come down to the fact that Rand in the show was portrayed as pretty bland and flip-floppy, and all of a sudden angry, so that's interesting. But through this, we'll get to know Rand a lot better. It'll clue us into how they all feel as they discuss things, but more importantly, Rand is brave, honorable, the classic hero of the story. And at this point in the books, we're really trying to get to know Rand, because it'll be really important for later. He takes the forefront. However, I will concede that I'm not really sure on this. I'll explain later in the episode, but maybe Matt should take the forefront here, just because of the rewrite and how we're putting it to screen. So, this can't really be exactly like the books, and we'll see if I made the right choice later down the line. The other benefit, of course, is that we don't have this awkward scene that we do in the show of Moraine, like, I don't know, waving at Egwene while she sleeps and scaring her. Instead, they meet totally out in the open. It's not awkward or secret. And that way we get to see everyone talk about it and discuss it. Much better reactions than Rand just being like, "You snuck away to talk with her, you're on her side." Honestly, it feels like some serious Star Wars prequel stuff going on, with Rand being like, "You turned her against me." Oh, man. Never fashion your writing after after Anakin Skywalker lines from the prequel trilogy. Okay, so we've got a lot of benefits. I want to give a bit of context. In the show, we see Matt talking about Nynaeve. This is really a waste of time. We could have better understood our characters instead of trying to tell about another character that we didn't portray at all in the last scene. Like, show don't tell is pretty basic writing knowledge. So if you know anything about writing, you know show don't tell. I mean, I knew this back in middle school. So the thing is that they had to tell us about Nynaeve in the scene because they didn't show us. However, because of our rewrite, we don't need to waste time on this. Instead, we can show the boys' characters by just having them talk about stuff. And their discussion clues us in on who they really are. We also aren't going to waste time because the thing is that the show wastes a lot of time on this contrived will they won't they romance between Rand and Egwene, which, like last time, I will talk about at the end of the episode. Also, there's an important thing going on here for context that Rand blames himself for dragging Egwene into this, even though it was her own decision. See, Rand's kind of a paragon, and even though Egwene chose to leave, he tries to take on too much responsibility. This is eventually very important for both their story arcs. The thing is that Egwene had a personality, a character, a reason to be on this adventure. And they kind of bounce back and forth between that and this, and we don't really get to see why she wants to do things, why she's excited to partner more with Moraine and things like that. So again, I'll talk about this later. Just know that it's important for context as to why I rewrote the scene in this way. Okay, in this next scene, we have something in here to spice things up. Matt says something, better introducing his character to us more fully, and also setting up this scene by talking about having to dance for Moraine, but it's still better than Nynaeve telling him what to do. This adds a splash of comedy where Nynaeve can catch up to him, and it is in this scene that Nynaeve can catch up to him and complain at the same time for how long she's been chasing them. Even though we couldn't properly convey the passage of time because of budget reasons, this allows us to, one, have a funny moment, but also better characterize a relationship that's an interesting dynamic and important in the series between Matt and Nynaeve, as it's kind of crucial to both of their growing experiences, but also we have a much better idea of the timing. Not to mention, as always, I'm not even putting it in the benefits anymore because it's basically every scene. It's more accurate to the books. So, follow this by a dream sequence of the boys in the forest. They hear a voice talking to them. Maybe it says something along the lines of, "Are you the one?" Something that conveys that this is not some feral beast hunched over staring at them like gremlins in their sleep, but this is a refined person, one who's tricksy and cunning and dangerous. Whatever the dialogue is, we can cut to them waking up, looking around, and it doesn't matter which boy it is. Because of what I was saying earlier about maybe Matt should take the forefront, I'm going to say Matt here and stick to my guns. So Matt should have this dream where he sits up and he looks around only to find a man standing facing the other direction. We're going to give the show the benefit of the doubt here and say that they do not have time to show these like dreams all the time. Because this is rushed, right? There's a lot of these. I know I'm interrupting myself here. This was really rushed. There's a lot of things that happen, and it slowly builds up to a scene where he actually kills some rats, and he does so just by pointing at it. He doesn't actually hold it, which is good, because I'm fairly certain that these are CGI, and it's easier to composite the scene, or I'm probably using the wrong term, but it's easier to put together the scene if it's not in his hand, because it doesn't have to interact with anything real. And more importantly, we can only see the weaves so far with Moraine, and so it's good that he just points to the rat, and it arches its back, and its neck is snapped. This is much, much better world building, but also it should save a ton of money. And then it's only at this point in time that he turns around just at the end of the scene to reveal flaming eyes. I'm not really sure if it's in the budget. It should be about the same price or cheaper. However, it would be really cool if we can squeeze it in the budget here to have him smile and have flames come out of his mouth as well. I'm pretty sure it's important here to have the face looking otherwise normal. See, I know that the cover of the book showed almost an ashen face with flames coming out of it. However, in the description of the book, I don't remember his face being anything but normal, except for the flames coming out of his eyes and mouth. So, correct me in the comments below if it does actually describe his face as ashen, but he definitely looked a little bit like Darkseid to me in the show, and I really don't think he was supposed to be. Even though, again, there was a cover of a book that did depict him that way. However, that was just an artist and his rendition of it, but I don't think that was accurate. Okay, the benefits of this, though, is that the scene doesn't really save money, but it doesn't cost any more either. I think we should save money this way, especially having some of the dialogue happen with the blank screen, because the boys are dreaming, and it's supposed to kind of like be an awakening to a dream. I feel like it's a really smooth transition. It makes sense, but it's also not expensive. And we're all for making it really cool without raising the budget. So, okay. Also, you don't have to show the CGI face as much, which means we have a lot less CGI going on here, and so that should be pretty efficient. Anyway, moving on from the budget, this scene within the bounds of the challenge, I assume again that we have to keep it to just this one dream, and we can't do a slow build to this level of dream, because this kind of thing doesn't happen till very near the end of the book. And so, with that being the case, we're just going to assume that we can't keep up. And so I would actually prefer to do this with a slower burn, but that's just, it's not really a benefit, but it is the confines of the challenge. Okay. I guess that's kind of my context, though, for you, is that in the books, they do have these dreams, but these dreams are a lot more milder at this point in time, because the Dark One, he isn't strong enough yet to influence them that heavily. And so it's more like, again, this is just for context, that have how it happened in the book, but maybe he like threw a fireball in their face and they sit up and their cheeks are warm. And so at first you can wonder, like, ooh, is this really happening? Or is this like, are they just scaring themselves? And it's not until later that things so drastic happen that it's like, oh, in my dream, he broke the rats' backs. And then they find that all the rats in the tavern have broken backs. And so it's a slow build. But here we assume we don't have that kind of time. I just wanted to give you the context. Okay. There is this scene. I wanted to mention it just so you're on track with what we're thinking here. There's the scene in the show where they sing this song about Monethrin. I think it can probably stay along with a lot of the exposition, but this is not when it happens. So we're going to move this to later. Even though it wasn't in the books, I begrudgingly admit that it was pretty cool. It just could have been pulled off a little bit better. And so we're going to move it to another spot, and we'll get to that later. I won't talk too much on this because I don't think it's a good idea to talk a lot about scenes that we're cutting. So, getting on to the next scene, I am conflicted about this as well, mainly because of the rules of the challenge. See, if I could watch the rest of the season and then go back, I might move this. It depends on how much time I'll have later. However, I'm assuming that we're not going to have time to introduce Elias Machira And so that whole scene with the where this whole like plot line we get from the books with the wolves and the wolf brother and the tinkers, which again I don't have time to explain it now. We'll see if they bring it up later. I think it should suffice in this scene because again, the rules of the challenge, I'm going to assume that I have to shoehorn this in there because I don't have time to spend actual story time on it later. So here's how I would do it instead. That's a bit of my conflict, but I think we do something but make it smaller and simpler. The wolves simply looking at them while Perrin sits at the campfire. We keep only him in the shot, although we imply that the others are just on the other side of the fire. Perrin's the only one who notices them. A glance passes between them, and the wolves walk away without causing any conflict. And then Perrin sits there pondering, like maybe something was weird about that, and it feels like it was odd, and we don't really explain why because it'll come back later. I think this makes the scene a little less awkward. I felt like it was so jarring. It was weird that Perrin was just all of a sudden off by himself, surrounded by wolves, and you had to wonder like, how did we get here? Um, and then also having them walk up, lick his leg, and walk away was kind of weird. I think this simple like glance at each other and you're left to wonder what's going on is much better. And hopefully we'll have time to better explain this later. But I don't want to waste too much time on it now because it's not really relevant yet. It hasn't happened in the books, and I'm not opposed to moving something up here, but the problem is that I'm just not sure what our timeline is going to be looking like. So, okay. This is the scene that we get to where we spend the money that we saved on the earlier Taran Ferry shot. We've been saving every dime we could in this episode to make sure we can get this money shot because it's kind of important. I think at best we should show that there's simply like fires behind them, smokestacks, things that are much like episode 1, showing us that there are Trollocs on the horizon, but they're not right on their backs. This is important because in a drawn out chase over land like this, it's not like a car chase through the city where you just have to shake them by going down the right street. You're being tracked over miles and miles. It's weeks of travel. And so them being like, I don't know, 2 days behind you is significant. It means that depending on how fast they march, they could catch up with you within like a week kind of thing. Don't quote me on anything I just said. I'm just trying to convey that this is not like a they're right up behind me kind of chase scene. This is important because here there's Trollocs that block their path. It's just a small band of Trollocs that have gotten ahead, maybe an advanced party of some sort, cutting off their forward march. They're too close to run away, and so not wanting to double back on the larger forces of Trollocs, this is where they're forced into a fight. They charge in full force that they can muster, and here is where we get a scene where Matt calls out, Carayon Caldazar, Carayon Alasanda, Al Alasanda, as he rushes into battle. Also, Thom can reveal himself as more than he seemed to be as he uses his throwing knives to take out Trollocs here. Now, this scene is way more impactful than wasting our money on simple chase scenes that come to nothing. Instead of spending so much money on showing us that the Trollocs are behind them and showing them falling into a river and showing them Myrdral screeching like a ringwraith, we'll get to that later, but it's a little weird. That's not how it happens. That's not what they're like in the books. This should introduce a bit of mystery to the characters as well. I mean, in the books, you're wondering what just happened, especially after Moraine explains what that means, and we'll get to that in the next scene. But it adds that mystery, and also This is where it'll give weight to that scene where they're singing about Manetheren that we haven't had yet. It's still coming, don't worry. For context, though, none of them knew why Moraine needed them. Just that Myrddraal appearances made it obvious that the Dark One was after them. Due to this change, we instead cast suspicion on Matt as the Dragon Reborn because we already know that's why Moraine's here. And so we want to keep something going on with that. Even though, like I said, that's really not how it happened in the books. But per the rules of the challenge, we assumed that we didn't have time, so we're scrunching it in and making sure that we introduce the concept that one of them is the Dragon Reborn. Also, in order to keep that mystery and in order to have these cool character moments from the book, we're going to have this scene cast suspicion on Matt. Maybe he is the Dragon Reborn. He speaks the old tongue. Maybe he's a reincarnation. Something along those lines that will help us to pull some non-contrived drama. And I want to explain how I'm going to structure this, but not in this episode, I don't think. We'll see if I have time to get to it at the end. Okay. Trollocs chase them into Shadar Logoth. This doesn't have to be super close. It just has to convey that they're behind them, maybe surrounding them. Maybe Land can tell them, like, we've defeated these, but there are droves behind us. There's probably about 4,000 Trollocs behind us. We used the excuse of Moraine being exhausted to avoid using more VFX on her weaving the one power. Moraine can also make her protective wards off screen to avoid additional spending here as well. But for context, Moraine is conscious, and she goes in willingly. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it's her idea, not Land's, which is kind of awkward, and we'll get to why I say that at the end of the episode when I talk about Land's character in this. With Moraine remaining conscious, we have the Manetheren song scene, and cutting the scene with Egwene and Rand holding hands as as we will be cutting all scenes that have this contrived romance between them. I'll explain why in the character portion of the episode. But lastly, it is broad daylight, and that should be pretty obvious. The only reason why we would keep it kind of dim and dark in the city like they did in the show is if we absolutely had to for budget. But just keep in mind that if it doesn't increase our budget, then that's how we would have shot it. However, we'll give them a free pass if that was the case. Okay, I think the major benefits here, though, of having the Manetheren song happen in the city is the Manetheren song is a somber song. Weep for Manetheren, weep for Aemon, weep for all the dead. What a perfectly eerie song that could have happened in Shadar Logoth to make it feel more eerie. This is why it was so important that I mentioned that we cut out the Egwene and Rand holding hands and looking over the city romantically. That didn't add to the eeriness of the city. The city feels abandoned. The city feels creepy. And we kind of flittered back and forth as to whether or not we were supposed to feel uneasy in this city. I think instead of having that romance scene, we could have very easily overlooked the city, still gotten to see the city, because I think that was kind of a big part of the point, is that it gives us a nice overview shot of the city as they go up in a building. The problem is that going into the buildings is dangerous unless if Moraine has warded it. This will be very important in our next scene. The thing here is that if we look over the city, instead of in a romance moment, with the Manetheren song, we should preserve some eeriness here. Also, when the exposition comes regarding Shadar Logoth and how it's the betrayer of Manetheren, it gives more weight, as it's all a part of the same story. It can flow a little more naturally. You can have this song sung, Moraine explain what that really means. It doesn't matter whether it's sung by the Two Rivers people or whether it's by Thom Merlin. Both would work just fine. But it is during this scene that they can kind of have a back and forth conversation where it's like, oh, who betrayed Monethrin? And it's like, well, the city that we're standing in. And also, it is more in line with the feeling of the books, even though it's not exactly how it happened. Okay, a bit of context here, though, as well. They changed something from the books to the show. They had this thing where this giant wall sealed them off and there was no gate, and no one saw from them since. The thing is that we learned a little bit more about the greed of Monethrin here. Or not Monethrin, sorry. The greed of Shadar Logoth, or at the time it was called Aridhal. So it would I don't think there was a necessary like reason to change it. I guess it kind of added like a visual effect to have that massive like broken wall. I just don't think it was necessary. And the only reason why I bring this up is because even though it's like fine, it can stay, it's not true to the books, but it's not really like against the feeling of the books. So it's not like out of tone. It's not tonally dissonant with the story that the books was telling. Anyway, the point is that there's really just one reason why I bring this up, and I'll talk about that when the scene comes that I have to change as a result. So Moraine does need rest, though, and so they do take some time to rest in the city while it's still daylight. Here's where I think we should see Mat convince the others to explore where they can find the dagger together in a little room. I am going to guess here that having a big room with lots of gold and having another actor introduce it is probably more expensive when it comes to budget. So, again, we're not going to fault them for it. We're actually going to keep it mostly the same. It should just be the three boys going out together as Mat convinces them to get into trouble. Now, I keep saying the three boys. It's because Egwene kind of stands apart from them. And she would never go along with what Mat is trying to pull them into. That's something that the boys get into trouble, even though the four of them are friends. And so, by not including her in this in particular, especially because she's so excited to train with Moraine and she sticks with Moraine and things like that, not only do we get a better idea of her character and motivations and making her an actual person, but also we get another feel for the group dynamic, which is always good. It's always helpful. The other thing here is that we can kind of showcase their friendship as well as, a lot of stuff going on. With Mat, maybe they do see Mat take the dagger. Just because I don't see how we could showcase Mat taking the dagger discreetly. Like before, it was in a massive treasure room, and they were so busy looking around at other places that they didn't see Mat pick up the dagger. So, honestly, we could play it either way. We could have them see him and Mat be like, "Don't snitch," and they're like, "It's super dangerous. Don't do that." And he's like, "Don't be a snitch," and they just don't tell Moraine. But I think it probably would have been better if we instead had them maybe looking at another building when he like found the dagger in the rubble or something like that. I don't know. The point is saving money while also trying to stay true to the vibes of the book. And the main point to having the three of them leave together is because they've wandered farther than expected. So this gives them a reason to be there till dusk when the city gets real dangerous. Else, Moraine would have left hours ago. Now, I only have a few things to say on this final scene of everyone escaping. First of all, the scene with Mashadar, the shadows in the show. In the books, they would have been more like a cloud, a silvery cloud that sucks your soul. However, in this, we can keep it mostly the same. I'm sure that shadows are 100 times easier than mist, because mist is kind of a gas simulation when it comes to the effects, and so I'm sure it's more expensive. However, we will cut the scene with the horse being dusted. In the books, we see that when people get touched by Mashadar, their eyes just go white. Sometimes they'll scream and stuff or whatever, but we get the sense that something has been sucked out of them, but they haven't been devoured by it. There is something else that does that, but it's not here. There is another creature that does that kind of thing. But we'll talk about Machin Shin later. The point is that instead of spending the money on dusting a horse, we simply have its eyes go hollow. Maybe we just put some white over the eyes to save us a bit of money. The other thing that I should probably mention, this is what I was talking about with why it's a little weird that the walls are built up insanely tall and that they sealed themselves in. First of all, that grate was pretty easy to get to, so I feel like the mystery of having to break down the wall to look inside the city is a little it's a little contrived because there's these like gates, these like not a portcullis, what are they called? They're these like sewer grates that are large enough for people to walk through. That's where Matt and Rand go through. And I just feel like there was an easier way than toppling the wall. They could have just easily gotten in through there for the people who came to show to see the place. And so that's a bit of inconsistency with their world building, I feel like, where it was unnecessary to make this impassable wall because it kind of made for this contrived. It's not a big deal because it's kind of in the background, but it's just something that I noticed. The other thing here with the walls being so tall and there being no gates is that Egwene and Perrin are forced to climb to the top and then jump off into the river. Here's the thing. These walls are massive. There's been some debate between me and other people as to how tall, whether it's like 60 feet or 100 feet or taller. However tall it is, I can tell you that at best, their legs should be broken jumping off of that thing. At worst, they're both very super dead. Even if they jump directly into the river, which that close to the wall, we see in other scenes that it's very shallow there. And so the water, even if it wasn't tall enough to make it like kill on impact for water, it's still probably going to kill them or break their legs because they're going to hit the ground. It's not deep enough. More importantly, they're not high divers, and so even if it were water, they were probably going to die anyway, or knock themselves unconscious and drowned. Regardless of how it went down, there's not very many scenarios where jumping off a wall like that is survivable. Now, this is a fantasy book, but in general, it's a very grounded fantasy book. And so dying from a fall like that is very much something that could happen in the book. And so this kind of incredible scene that you would maybe take for granted in a cartoon was a little out there for a very grounded and realistic TV show, I'm sorry. Okay, so with that being out of the way, I'm also a little confused as to where in the show, where Moraine and Land were supposed to have exited. Did he just take them back to where the Trollocs were? Because if he did, then like that seems a little weird that he just like ran away from the boys and went back. Like it's really not true to Land's character. It's really not true to Moraine's character. But more importantly, regardless of whatever happened, consider this. If Nynaeve has been tracking them as she is supposed to have done, and she met up with them after Shadar Logoth, did she just track them through Shadar Logoth and just like casually miss the fact that shadows were devouring the city? I don't think so. So the way they reshot it simply doesn't make sense. Either Nynaeve is a bumbling idiot who just wandered in the forest until she happened to bump into someone, or she tracked them through Shadar Logoth and back out again and ended up, stuck with them. The thing is that in the books, they're separated by the mists, which again, we can keep it shadows in this. But ultimately, Nynaeve is separated and stuck with Moraine because that's just who she happens to find after getting separated in the city. And again, because there is this whole like no gate thing, I'm left not only to wonder where Lan and Moraine went, but I'm also forced to wonder how Nynaeve was able to track them in and out of the city, given the circumstances. Okay, now that we've gotten through our episode, this is the scene where we end with them all separating. Thom, Mat, and Rand end up together. We're going to give the show the benefit of the doubt and say that we don't have the budget to show any more Trollocs on screen, especially not fighting them. And so we're instead going to, and we're actually not even going to showcase the boat. We're just going to showcase them leaving and getting to the river by the end of the episode. But we make sure that we have the right people together. It's Thom, Rand, Mat. Then it's Perrin and Egwene. And then it's Moraine, Lan, and Nynaeve. Almost like it was in the show, as far as the separation, except for Nynaeve was with them much, much earlier in the episode, and she's back with them, specifically with Lan and Moraine by the end of the episode. Okay. Okay. Characters. Mat. He had some funny lines in this, but ultimately we still have not found Mat's true character. Mat's funny, and he's a butthead. He gets them into trouble constantly, but ultimately he's loyal. When it comes down to it, he'll have the scheme that will get you out of the frying pan and into the fire, but he will always be there to pull you out too. And if you got yourself into the frying pan or out of the frying pan and into the fire, then he'll come and help you too. Even if he doesn't say that's what he'll do, that's what Mat's character shows. I don't feel like we saw that too much in the show. This episode was far better. I would say that unlike last episode where I put Rand pretty high on the scale of people who were depicted all right, I think I said it was Lan, Moraine, Rand. In this episode, it's probably Mat. And then I really have to put everyone else on the same just horribly depicted level. He was best depicted in this episode, but even then it wasn't perfect. We had him talking to Perrin as a buddy, giving him the dagger, which shouldn't have been a thing because, as we discussed in the last episode, Perrin wasn't married, and we're going to keep it that way in our rewrite. So that scene, though, kind of showed his like loyal buddy side, and he had a few funny lines, but ultimately we haven't seen the roguish, childish, funny Mat, who is a butthead until you're in the fire, and then he helps pull you out, because ultimately there's a reason why they continue to be Mat's friend. It's because fundamentally he is a good person. Moving on to Thom. Thom needs a lot of explanation in this. See, we haven't introduced Thom at all, and so I'm going to do my best here. Thom is witty. He is arrogant. He is very bombastic. He loves to steal the show. There's a reason why he's a Gleeman. It's because he likes it when the spotlight's on him. Also, Gleemen in general, I've only explained briefly, but they're acrobats, they're musicians, they're travelers who go through the land, and they will get paid by inns or by towns or cities to host events where they entertain, and they are universally loved. Everybody will talk to a Gleeman, and Thom is like the Gleeman. He is a Gleeman personified. Everything that a Gleeman stands for or is, Thom is also. And then we find out that he's got a lot more going for him, in that we see him fight the Trollocs with his throwing knives and using his showmanship skills for combat in a way that implies that there's a lot more to his character than we know. That said, we're not going to show anything about his character besides this for books to come. So because of that, we're just going to leave it at that so far. Now, I'm going to move on to Moraine. I'd love to spend a lot of time on each of these characters, but I can't. So Moraine in this, simply, other than what I said last time, I think it still stands, honestly. She just wasn't caring enough. The thing is that Moraine, anytime she causes trouble, even when they're running for their lives and she's willing to do whatever it takes to defeat the Shadow, she understands that there are times that she doesn't have to cause more collateral damage. And so when an inn accidentally gets burned down because they stayed in it, and the Trollocs then, and some dark friends then burn down the inn, she pays for it. When she tricks the Taran ferryman to get her across the river, she pays for the property damage, but she doesn't put anyone's life in danger, not if she doesn't have to. And the thing is that the show put her in a situation where she kind of had to, but she still comes off as fundamentally uncaring. When in the books we can see that she is the quintessential Blue Aja, which is all about a cause. Blue Ajas set out to save the world. They try to improve the world, and that's kind of their role. And no one's more Blue Aja than Moraine. And so we really need to see that more. Okay, I don't know how long this is going to take me, but if it takes me a while, it takes me a while, because I have to talk about Lan in this episode. It portrays Lan as a dummy, rather than the most highly skilled Borderlander that we see in the books. Lan is a highly coveted warder in that he is an absolute... Well, first of all, he has a dangerous air about him. It feels like he's just a barely tame animal. Now, I don't say this because he's, like, impolite, but, like, people feel in danger when he's around them. And so I think they could have stood to make him a little more intimidating. However, that said, we kind of see a softer side of Lan later, and so I don't think that Lan needed to be perfectly depicted as scary here. But that said, I just thought I'd give you a bit of context with that. The important part is, though, that this episode and the show at large so far has painted him as somewhat of a dummy. Oh, great with the sword, but he's got no brain. The thing is, I touched on this in the last episode, that seeing the corpses set out in the dragon's fang, the teardrop kind of thing, I'm not really sure which they were going for. The point is, it worked. It looks like a weird cult circle. This would have been done by the Trollocs, canonically, and it didn't make sense for the Trollocs to have done it, because Trollocs don't have rituals. Trollocs just kill, 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 eat, eat, eat. Food, sleep. Very base, very... they're not intelligent. They don't have higher motivations. It's just kill, eat, have fun, destroying. I know we already talked about that last episode. That said, in this episode, it continues the trend with Lan. When they ask him, like, oh, how much time do we have? He's like, not enough. It's like, no. Lan in the books is like, I would say like 3 to 4 hours. There's probably about 2,000 of them. In fact, Lan actually goes ahead. He runs ahead because he's much faster than them. And as a warder, he gets special endurance. He doesn't need as much sleep. He doesn't need to take as many breaks. He can run farther. Technically he can't run faster, but because he's a skilled woodsman, he gets ahead of them, and he leaves markings on the trees for them to follow behind. I get why they didn't do this in the show, because it might have cost more money. It might have cost more to set these kinds of scenes up. It might have been more work. The point is, though, that we didn't convey the intellect of Lan. Furthermore, not only did they depict him generally as not being highly intelligent, but later in the episode, it makes him look like a dummy. As I said, Moraine was conscious. It was her decision to go into Shudder Logoth, at least to the best of my memory. So having Lan be the one to make that decision and making it a dumb decision because he didn't tell anyone to get out by nightfall. The thing is that Moraine is pretty well versed in history and lore in the world. She makes this survival campaign easy, and it's not until they get separated so that all the Two Rivers folk are alone, minus Nynaeve. It's not until they're totally separated that the journey becomes difficult. Because when they're traveling with Lan and Moraine, she is capable of protecting them. It's kind of a little bit like King's X, although running into Trollocs is genuinely dangerous for them. The point, though, is mostly that they can keep the boys out of danger, not that they can fight the whole army. Hopefully you get what I'm saying. But the point is that in the show, they depicted Lan bringing her in and then her waking up and being like, you doomed us all, and then the shadows is like a surprise to him. Like they didn't know to get out by nightfall. The thing is that it was the Two Rivers people's error that caused them to be there too late. Not to mention the fact that Trollocs actually went inside the city. Now, we're giving them the benefit of the doubt, as I said, and we're going to say that Trollocs being in the city was not an option. But what we will depict here is that the boys split up and they caused them to be there too late. And it showcases how important the boys must be to Moraine. And I'm sorry, I said in the first episode that it didn't really matter whether Egwene was included in the possible Dragon Reborn cycle, except for she is 2 years too young. They would have had to have been born within weeks of each other for her to even be a candidate. And so we're not including her in the potentials for the prophecy. So I will continue to say the boys. It's not because of anything except for Egwene's the wrong age, because she's the youngest by far in the group. She's, like I said, I think if I remember correctly, she's 2 years younger than the boys, and the boys are all almost exactly the same age, born in the same month. Within, I think they were all born within a week of each other, if I remember correctly, which is the significance of them being the potential ones, because they were all born at the right time with good enough circumstances. But the point is that in this, it should have been someone who didn't know better causing the trouble, because they should have known to get out of the city before it was dark. So Lan is just a total dummy in this who screwed up and got the group separated, and then and then Nynaeve sneaks up on him. So that's not significant because we haven't shown how skilled Lan is. So nothing, all these like big reveals like ooh didn't come off because Lan just feels like a dummy who fight good with sword. And so the other issue with Nynaeve sneaking up on on them here is, as I said before, she's already with the group. There's some serious problems where it's like, did Lan just like run out back? Like, did he go back through the giant crack in the wall? Is that what happened? Like, it makes Lan feel even dumber if that is what happened, because he's like, oh no, Shadar Logoth was a bad idea, and he runs out and carries Moraine. Moraine kind of concedes that Shadar Logoth was a bad idea, but it wasn't really her fault for things going wrong. She did, if things would have gone according to plan, she could have protected them through the city. So, okay, I'm done ranting about what a dummy they made Lan in this. Egwene. I talked about how regressive it was in the last episode, because Egwene had her own motivations for leaving, and then they just degrade her character by having it be for plot reasons, like, oh yeah, she's just a girl character, we'll give her some romance and say that she is a prophecy person and she can go with the group. No, Egwene was her own person who left for her own reasons, and she's totally independent of the boys. She doesn't need them. And so she actually basically sneaks away with them. They're like, you don't have to go, you're not one of the prophecy people. And she's like, I want to go, the boys want to stay, but she wants to go. I think that's far more compelling, that of them, she's the strong one, because she's like, And I say strong, but actually it's probably more accurately naive at this point. But the point is that she's strong-willed enough that the boys are like, we just kind of want to stay home and not worry about this. And she's like, no, adventure time. And so I really don't think that there's any problem with actually depicting her as a character rather than demoting her to plot point. She might as well just be the just be like the object, a MacGuffin in a generic plot, because again, we don't really understand why. I talked about this in the last episode, but we hadn't seen anything happen, so there wasn't much to be motivated towards. But in this one, you can really see where it's like, what's her motivations? Why is she so on board with Moraine? It feels like a flip-flop. Even though everything she says makes sense, we haven't showed her character enough for it to feel like it's Egwene making this decision because it's natural for her to. Rather, it feels like she's been demoted. I mean, think about it. In the books, she was strong-willed. She's not deterred by a Trolloc attack. She sees Trollocs attacking, and she's like, man, that was scary. Let's do this. I'm going on an adventure. I'm going to get chased by Trollocs, and we're going to fight Trollocs, and she is on board with that. There are people who feel like Egwene's kind of annoying because she's very overbearing, but the point is that she is brave and ready to go. In this, she's demoted to panicky, run away from the fight, crying over Nynaeve, simple character who's only there to be a love interest for Rand. I mean, if you think about it, whether you're a fan of Egwene or not, she had a personality, and she had guts and gusto. And we demoted her to just being someone that Rand was simping after. Now we're demoting her even further, because in this, now she's simping after Rand, and she's only there for this romantic plot. And for Moraine to give some exposition. But her character beats don't make sense. When she yells at Rand, she doesn't convince him. It's Mat that convinces him. So we just keep degrading this character farther and farther so that she has no bearing on the story. Honestly, so far we could have cut her out and it wouldn't make a difference because she doesn't have a true character and she doesn't have a point to the plot. Now, I'm going to transition to Rand here because a big part of this is Rand is a perfect paragon. He's always doing the right thing. He's always trying to be good. And when Egwene comes along, he feels like it's his fault because he couldn't talk her down. He takes that blame on himself because he does that too much. He takes all the blame on himself and tries to save the world, single-handed. So, by properly characterizing Egwene, we see that Egwene's there for her own reasons, but we also get an interesting dynamic. Rand feels like he needs to protect her. Not because she needs protecting, not because she asked for protecting, but because Rand feels like he could have done better and she did not have to be a part of this. Honestly, he's protective of everyone. We see this later for context in the books when Rand is literally carrying a blind Mat. And he's taking care of him when he's sick. Even when he's in danger, he doesn't abandon his friends. He will drag them to safety across months of travel if he needs to. That's just who Rand is. By better characterizing Egwene, we also get a better idea of Rand because we see someone who doesn't need protecting that he's still trying to protect. And that's just who Rand is. It would have been awesome if we saw this in this episode. It would have been awesome to have strong female leads that aren't dragged around by the plot. They did a pretty good job of that with Moraine. Moraine isn't necessarily dragged around by the plot, but they still had her totally faint and just be carried around for several scenes. Again, I'm only bringing this up because this concept of progressive female leads is very prevalent in the books, And it's also something that was discussed before the series came out as something that was highly important. And so I don't think that it's necessary that every woman that's depicted on screen should be always tough all the time and can never be saved, especially not by a man. I think that's going too far. If it's the only thing that's shown, then yes, that's regressive. But in this, we're diverging from the books to turn them into simple um like they need to be damsels in distress is the word that I'm looking for. So I don't mind the concept of a damsel in distress if it's not overused. But in this, we've changed characters who didn't need saving into generic damsels in distress. Again, everybody needs saving at some time in the books. So sometimes girls are saving guys and guys are saving girls. That's not really what I'm trying to get at. It's just that in these scenes where these tough female leads are ready to go, they've been degraded to simple damsels in distress. And that's would have been fine if this was their first time telling a story, but that's simply not what they were in the books. They were every bit as capable as everyone else, and more likely at this point in the books to do the saving. So, actually, we'll talk about this in the next episode, I'm sure, but there's some interesting dynamics in that regard when it comes to Egwene and Perrin. So, Perrin is who I'll talk about next, because Perrin is a gentle giant. He's very kind. He's not very aggressive or forceful. He's just stubborn. So good luck changing his mind, but he's also not going to try and beat his opinion into your head. Like, that's just not Perrin. I don't know. I'm not sure who Perrin is in this. He hasn't had a lot of dialogue, which I guess is fine because Perrin isn't like a chatty Cathy in the books. So his character, because we don't have that very close psychic distance where we can hear his thoughts, might be a little harder to convey, but I think we should convey it. Show him helping set up beds or making campfires or doing something that shows that he is there, ready, kind, helpful, and gentle. So maybe show him be awkward when he helps someone up the rocks because he's trying to be gentle with them because he's afraid that he's so big and thick. Because Perrin is shredded. I mean, the books describe him having like arms as thick as most men's legs. He's like bodybuilder status, like just absolutely massive, tall. I'm not saying that the actor has to get shredded for this role. I get that that takes time and money and and it's hard work for the actors. I'm just saying that for context, have something conveying that Perrin is ridiculously strong and that he's very conscious of the fact that he's strong. And so he is constantly acting like everyone else is made of glass just because he doesn't want to hurt them. Showcase that somehow because his leaning too hard into restraint is a theme right up until way late in the books. Perrin is constantly holding back. This is one of the major problems that we had in the first episode. Not only was he not supposed to be married, but the idea that he killed his wife because he was in a flurry, not Perrin. Perrin won't struggle with that till later because he is constantly worried to invest his full emotion. He's constantly worried to invest his full strength. He doesn't go full ham into anything because he's too afraid of going too far. He's cautious, reserved, gentle, giant. Okay, one last comment. We're kind of going back to this concept of Rand and Egwene, except we're talking about their romance. Here's the thing. In the books, we don't dwell on their relationship too much. They're kind of awkward with each other because they haven't decided what they want to do. I think it's a very big mistake to depict this at all let alone put it at the forefront, because we simply don't have time to get to the will they, won't they, that really, honestly, is pretty obvious from the get-go that they're just good friends and that they're not really meant to be together. And it was so refreshing to have a non-romantic relationship between a male and female lead. In the books, they're running for their lives and they really don't have time. They don't know if their lives are ever going to be the same. So when are they going to get the chance to allow this relationship to develop? Besides which, it's not long after that before they realize that they just think of each other as a brother and a sister. So they end up deciding that their relationship is very friendly, on good terms, and is completely platonic. Again, this is so original when it comes to Hollywood, because Hollywood will always try and stick a good-looking man and a good-looking woman, and they're just like, boom, they're in a relationship now. Here's the thing. There's plenty of romance later, and this is not the time to depict it, nor is these the people to do it with, because like I said, we're wasting screen time that we have precious few of on developing a relationship that goes nowhere. There is plenty of romantic tension later, even a will they, won't they that is far more prominent. We're not going to talk about it now. In fact, I'm quite sure I'm out of time. But just know that, again, this is very far off, and it was really unfortunate that they keep trying to force the issue to make this another generic Hollywood movie. Okay. That's it for our episode. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a much better idea of what is happening in the episode. I know I didn't get to talk about the White Cloaks. I'm way past time here. But I hope that you have a better understanding of why people who have read the books are upset about the changes that are made here. Simply put, there is a way to stay within budget, stay within the time crunch, bring it to screen, and still depict properly everything that happens in the books. Now, I know not everything can happen because the books are just too long, and no one is going to be able to sit through a 40-hour season and do 14 seasons. That's just way too long, drawn out, way too much money. And I honestly don't think it's necessary. These rewrites convey the same feeling of the stories without taking too much more time, without diverging too much from our budget. So I hope, again, that this shows that it's not only possible, but that even with limited resources, you can see the difference here. All right, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for joining.